Welcome to Interwoven, a podcast where we follow the winding threads of literature as they weave together stories and voices across time and cultures. Hi everyone, welcome back to Interwoven. I'm Azgar Rahman, and today I'm joined by Dr. Keao NeSmith. He's a Hawaiian translator, linguist, and educator who's translated many children's works of fiction from English into Hawaiian, including the Harry Potter series, The Hobbit and Alice in Wonderland. He works on language revitalisation and national speakers' rights in Hawaii, advocating for the revival of endangered languages, including Hawaiian. How are you doing today?
Excellent. Thanks. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you here, and I'm sure our listeners are too. And to dive right in, I was wondering why it is that you sort of started translating children's literature. What inspired you to become a translator?
At first, I had just finished my PhD in studies in 2012. And it came across as an email message that was sent to my department at the time. I was faculty at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in Honolulu. And a general email message was sent to our faculty, and I replied. The request was asking if someone would be interested in translating Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And I had just finished a huge accomplishment with my PhD studies, and I was suddenly freer than I was. I was still faculty at the time, so I had that. And so I had done quite a bit of work in the area of translation before, so it wasn't unfamiliar, but I thought it would be a nice challenge and a little smile on my face as I said yes. And so I replied. And it was Evertype is the name of the publisher, based currently out of Dundee, Scotland. And Michael Everson is the director of Evertype. And so that was my first foray, and I haven't regretted it since.
That's really interesting, and I guess serendipity might have been one of the causes for the question I'm about to ask. But why is it that children's literature has been your chosen genre of translation? Why is it that you perhaps continued translating children's literature specifically?
If you look at the content, I know everyone thinks of Alice in Wonderland as sort of that cartoon image with all of the characters in it, which tends to get portrayed through the media and through merchandising as really children's literature. When anyone who's read the materials really understand, especially when you're more mature, you understand it as a lot more dark than what you would expect for children's literature. So I believe that Lewis Carroll, or Dodgson, the actual writer, Lewis Carroll intended to, how could you say politely, mess with the thinking of adults. I really think it's more adult than children's literature, to be honest. It definitely needs a certain maturity to really appreciate what he was getting at. But I believe that he perceived the politicians and the geopolitics of his era as child play. And so I believe that he intended to give it a sense of the nonsense aspects of his literature, which is probably his biggest contribution to literature, is the nonsense genre, which really has developed into a genre of its own since its time, probably just preceding his time as well. But I believe he intended to portray the adults of his era as nonsensical and childlike. So it may come across as child literature, but I don't really think it is, actually.
That's really interesting, because I guess it raises the question of how it is that you handle translating. Do you handle translating something like Alice in Wonderland, which you perceive as containing more adult-like content, or it's the kind of story that requires adult maturity. In light of that, how do you handle translating for a specific kind of audience? Do you have sort of both adults and children in mind when translating this specific genre?
Absolutely, absolutely. So it does require that even children, I wonder how many children, like if you're talking about primary school age children, how many of them actually grasp the meaning of the storyline of Alice's adventures in Wonderland? I think it's very possible. I don't know, but I think it's very possible that children kind of skim through and then maybe hold that memory of that story as they get older and might revisit it later as an adult and then later discover that, wow, that's pretty dark actually. Uh, or just remember the imagery of it, the rabbit, the Mad Hatter, and maybe see clips in video form as they get older, but not really investigate what the storyline is about. I think that eventually that is what happens. But I love playing in that space where you have to be both the adult and the child at the same time. So it really, and my PhD was in discourse analysis, genre, and such. And this absolutely came into play. And that also was serendipity. I didn't realize that I was about to step into this world of discourse. And so it is a rhetorical rabbit hole that I found myself falling into, which for me was a comfortable space. I love that free falling experience, actual contact with discourse. And so it does involve that nonsense, confusing play against each other, sense and nonsense, adult, child.
When you translate those categories and the almost the slipping away of those categories as well, how is it that you handle the translation of that from a more English sort of context into Hawaiian culture or Hawaiian contexts? Does that binary and the shifting of that binary within this discourse change? And does that then mean that your approach to translation also has to change according to the specific text that you're looking at?
I love that question because it is absolutely on point in that it is necessary to remember that as English speakers, you're all the way over there. You're exactly opposite side of the earth to me. I'm in Hawaii right now. You're in the UK. Europe is 12-hour time difference from here. The people of those areas on that side of the world, you're part of the earth where you are right now. You take it for granted as English speakers, Anglophones, that we all share the same culture as Anglophones. And as I dove into the work of translation, I came to realize very quickly I had no clue about British culture, especially of the Victorian era, of Lewis Carroll's era. I didn't know what a drawing room was. I thought it literally was a room for drawing. And it made me think that Lewis Carroll was an artist. Oh, he's an artist. I didn't know that. I had no idea that drawing room is a common term for what we would call a living room. So this is my living room here, for example. That's just a tiny example of the ridiculousness of what I thought was my comprehension or competence in the culture of Anglophone, the Anglophone world. So it is impossible to assume that just because you speak the language of the source text, that you actually understand the culture of the author and the era of the author. So that was a huge mistake on my part. So it was a hard lesson to learn. It was a learning curve that I went through to appreciate the fact that I'm really farther away from the culture of the author than I thought I was when I set out on this project. So there were tons of things that I had to learn, and there was tons of research that was needed. Can you imagine if we did not have the internet, the deficit in the gap in knowledge that I would have? I would have ran with drawing room as a room to draw. I would have ran with it. had I not had access to the internet to realize that, oh, by the way, that wasn't that. So that was the difficult part of the complicating aspects of being a translator. But I love that space. I love that I'm at the disadvantage, and I it makes me realize that I'm not in control of my universe all the time. And so it goes from one moment of realization of my frailty to another moment of another realization of my frailty. But once you overcome each of those points along the way, you can turn around and look back later and realize that I had come this far.
What you've said has reminded me of folk etymologies and that idea if you did end up running with your interpretation of drawing room. And I think it's so interesting how historically the research into etymologies behind words has actually been like that. So people just perceived a certain meaning behind a word and attributed its etymological history to that. So the word gospel has like a folk etymology, so an etymology that isn't actually accurate, that can be traced back to good news, which I think is really interesting. So again, that idea of like just running with your interpretation of a certain thing is really cool. And I think it's been seen historically, but yeah, the internet has definitely changed that now. But since you sort of speak from the angle or the perspective of retrospection, when you look back at some of your translated work, do you think you'd change aspects of it or alter your approach in hindsight?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, for example, working with Michael Everson of Evertype has been fantastic because he's an absolute professional at what he does, but he's also very excited to do editions. So we have a first edition, second edition. With The Hobbit, the Hawaiian version of The Hobbit is in its fourth edition.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's exactly because of that. It's because of me going through my own translation. And of course, many people say that they are their harshest critic. And that is absolutely true with me. So I'm never fully satisfied with the work that I've done. I'll even cringe as I thumb through the pages, read my own translation, and really go hard on myself and say, did I really do that? Oh my gosh! So I might mark it up, and then but I need to do the entire work. I need to mark up and do things, make notes along the way, and then I'll tell my publisher about it, and then we'll agree to do another edition. In fact, even the fourth edition right now is marked up. And so there is a possibility we could do a fifth edition, but he's so easy to work with that it's absolutely possible. It's not always possible with every publisher.
What are the changes that you think need to be made across these editions? What is it that you end up altering the most?
It's the voices in my head. The voices in my head yell at me to that where I need to imagine as a translator, as I'm reading the material. Mind you, it was the first time I had ever read The Hobbit as I was translating. So I asked for a Microsoft Word or RTF version of the text, and then I'll open it up on my computer and I'll create columns and I'll throw all of the original material on the left and I'll type on the right. And I am reading it for the first time. So I'm actually getting into the storyline as my fingers are typing on their own with their own, almost on with their own brain. And I imagine all of the discourse and all of the engagement between characters and even the voice of the narrator as actual native speakers of Hawaiian. And when you have turns in the dialogue, I need to imagine that scenario, and then turns in mood as well. I need to imagine that scenario as if the characters are entirely native speakers of Hawaiian. The trap for any translator is to just copy the English. That's the trap. and you can fall down and end up in a dark place that is foreign to your reader. So the fear that keeps you up at night as a translator is to create a translated product that your reader feels is foreign when it should feel natural. It should be the product at the end of the translation should read as if the story was originally written in that language, in the translated language. It should be that natural. So it should come across as if Lewis Carroll or Tolkien were Hawaiian speakers and wrote the story in Hawaii. That's kind of the bar, and it's a high bar. So I'm always horrified at the potential for not having met that bar.
I think it's really interesting that you say that because I had a course on like translated literature and comparative literature, and one of the things I came across was this theory that roots itself in post-colonial literary studies, and it argues that translations that move away from English contexts should actually retain that foreign element. It shouldn't entirely feel at home, because sometimes that smoothness of translation can sometimes almost play into colonial or Western-centric narratives, where the Western or the sort of English central narrative is then almost too perfectly transposed onto the target culture or target language. And so there needs to be some kind of gap that's retained even when translating. And the person who argues this is Lawrence Venuti. I don't really know how to pronounce his last name. And I was wondering what your response to that more recent sort of stream of translation theory is.
I love that question. Again, it's something that I experience, and I love that you have delved into various theoretical approaches and are able to label them, describe them, because these are what you just described there. I discovered for myself. I came across, especially the material is so dense. The Hobbit, it's quite dense. Even Alice in Wonderland, you think it's a thin book. No, the storyline is very dense. You discover these problems along the way. However, we're lucky in the Hawaiian language sense. The Hawaiians, through the 1800s, had a voracious appetite for foreign content, to learn about the world and to read their stories, because we're also voracious consumers of our own lore, of our traditional lore, which have elements of nonsense and have lots of elements of magic and lots of elements of intrigue between humans, and then intrigue between humans and gods. Those are core elements of Hawaiian lore. And Hawaiians were absolutely obsessed throughout the 1800s as they wondered whether the same tension exists in the lore of other peoples on the opposite side of the world. So in our newspapers, which are many, throughout the mid 1800s, we had perhaps 20, 30, at any given moment, there were 20, 30 different newspapers, publishers at one time. And they'd be weekly, monthly, bi-weekly publications, daily as well. And many aspects of of pages 2, 3, and 4 of each issue were translations of Arabian Nights, of Grimm's, the Brothers Grimm tales, and many stories that come from other countries that I never knew, and still I can't remember the names right now, but they were sourced from places like Scandinavia, Saudi Arabia, Africa, Asia, and England. Lots of material from Scotland and Ireland and such, because Hawaiians through the 1800s were fascinated with other peoples, other cultures. So even animals, Hawaiians had never seen a zebra before, crocodile, even a wolf, porcupine. So these tropes were being dealt with in a very in a literary sense in the Hawaiian language through the 1800s. So I have that as a model and a baseline for me to remember. And every day, because of the nature of my job, I'm a researcher and a consultant. Every day I'm reading 19th century Hawaiian language material through the newspapers, particularly through the Hawaiian language newspapers. One study had been done by Keao. He said in his work, over 1 million pages worth of Hawaiian language material through the 19th century,
Wow.
uh, which includes a lot of this translation of foreign material. So when I agreed to do the Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, I knew already that I would be stepping into the work
Mm.
of my forefathers throughout the 19th century. And so that's one of the big reasons, probably the biggest reason why I had a smile on my face as I
Mm.
said yes to the job. And I was available at that time. So there is a kind of role model for me to follow in that regard. So yes, I agree that when you do translation, as I read the translations, you have to do this with the translations
Mm.
of the 1900s. They too were dealing with how much of this do I retain as if it's a Hawaiian trope, traditional Hawaiian trope, or do I let the foreignisms shine through? And they chose much of the time, probably most of the time, to let the foreignness of it shine through. But as you read it in the Hawaiian language, beautiful Hawaiian, beautifully expressed, but you definitely get a sense that you're not in Hawaii anymore.
Mm.
So it was intentionally done so that you as a Hawaiian person are transported to a foreign environment with foreign creatures, foreign people who behave strangely to us, but really it's perfectly appropriate within their culture. So Hawaiians had a voracious appetite for this type of material, and I try to be true to that. One interesting how Hawaiian translators did in the 19th century is they go ahead and roll with the foreign environment and the foreign culture, foreign characters, and everything, but slide in traditional Hawaiian expressions that are directly traditional Hawaiian proverbs. Would slip them in there to express a sense of fear, a sense of beauty, a sense of appreciation, and they had the effect because they touch you. They hit you with the severity of the thought of the moment that in that instant, and so that was the interplay, and I tried to follow that tack.
Actually reminds me of something else I read, and it was the idea that translated literature ends up helping, especially endangered languages, create new genres or develop genres that they already have. And I was wondering if you've seen that with the translated work that you've been doing. So whether something like The Hobbit or Alice in Wonderland has actually invited new tropes within established genres in Hawaiian literature, or whether there's even been some sort of reception of that literature that you've translated.
Yeah, I love the direction that you're taking that in because another great thing of Evertype as a publisher, and mind you, the primary aim of Evertype as a publisher is to support lesser known languages around the world by providing high quality, on par, as top notch quality reading materials as with the major languages. So the illustrations, the fonts, the quality of the paper used is on par with any major language material. So I have great respect for that approach by Evertype. In this case, in my engagement with Michael Everson of Evertype, we have decided that we're going to be true to the quality of the work. Remind me again the back part of your question.
It was whether you've seen how the work that you've translated have an influence on established genres within Hawaiian literature.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, because what Michael Everson does is he also has published parodies of the original
Ah,
text.
that's really
So,
interesting.
but he makes it look exactly as if same font, same type, same style of illustrations, but it's a total parody, coming from various language points of view. And so I have pitched an idea to him that I would love to do a parody of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, because in our traditional lore, we have a trope. We have the story of Pele, the volcano goddess, the goddess of fire. She has a large family. She has sisters and she has brothers. Well, she has one sister in particular who was her favorite, her younger sister. And there, we actually have a story of Pele. She and her sister were at the beach, and she said, "I'm going to take a nap." And so her younger sister, and they're very close, said, "Okay, rest your head on my lap here." And Pele falls asleep, and her in her dream, in our culture, we believe that your spirit actually lifts out of your body and has these adventures while you're sleeping. And so Pele's spirit heard the sound of this, the beating of a drum from a distance, and she was intrigued in her spirit. So while she's sleeping, her spirit gets up and wanders off, and guess what happens? She has all these bizarre experiences along the way. Many of them are eerily similar to the various phases of the storyline of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. So I pitched the idea to Michael that I see Pele in this story and her sister, and I want to do a parody of Alice's Adventures and call it Pele's Adventures in Dreamland, because they all happen. And even the ending of that story of Alice is similar in many ways to the ending of the story of this Pele story. So that brings us to the Carl Union school of thought of the archetype, and how, as I said earlier, the UK is on the opposite side of the earth to Hawaii, and yet we develop these same storylines. And our story of Pele, that's centuries old. That's probably 1300s, maybe 1400s. Yeah, so it's so fascinating to find all these synchronicities.
Yeah, Helen Cooper calls archetypes specifically within medieval literature, which also very much saw that idea of archetypes being repeated across different languages and cultural literary traditions, and she calls them memes, which I think is really funny and interesting considering how that meaning has changed over time. And I had the privilege of hearing you speak last year at the Pitt Rivers Museum. And I vividly remember you speaking about how you changed punctuation marks in Harry Potter. And I thought that was really, really cool. And I'm sure our listeners would be interested in knowing more about that as well, and how punctuation influences the way that you establish pace or rhythm in your translated works.
Absolutely. So 2 weeks ago, I was in Montreal and gave that same presentation to McGill University. There was a linguistics conference there. The attendees were primarily coming from Native American linguistic communities in the area throughout Canada and North America that were looking to develop and support their languages through these ways. So I was presenting to them this possibility. So I gave the exact same presentation over there. One presenter who presented just before me was a professor focusing on translation as a practice and as a field. And he was describing, and I very much appreciated how he was talking about the act of translation is actually an act of violence on the source language, necessarily so. And I dovetailed onto that and said that is absolutely true. So when you take source language A, you're going to translate it to target language B. If that already, according to his presentation, if that already is an act of violence on language A, the target, the source language, it should be criminal to take the target language B and translate that into target language C. That is such a far departure from source language A that it is necessary in the way I perceive it, that if you're going to do a second translation in a different language, that the translation must go from source language A to target language C, not source language A to target language B and then to target language C, which, for many people, it can have serious consequences. For example, the Bible or the Quran. If a translation made available to a local language was not from the source language A, but rather a translation of source language A into target language C, you're creating a problem that can have serious consequences that can even, it can really put someone's sense of their existence in jeopardy as far as how they perceive themselves, hegemony and paradigm and so forth. So it's such an important thing, but Hawaiian is not English and never will be, should not be. That's a topic that we'll set that aside for another conversation. But questions become statements, statements become questions, because in the target language, you have to do that. Otherwise, you're losing your audience. If you try to maintain every punctuation in the source language, you absolutely must reframe your entire, how you imagine that scene in the source language. Now I have to replace that same scene, but with native Hawaiian speakers interacting with each other. We wouldn't speak to each other in such ways. And I have examples in my head right now. I don't want to stray too far away, but a quick example would be French. People sit down at a table for a meal, especially dinner, and everyone sits there. No one touches a utensil. No one will touch the fork or the knife. Everyone will just sit there. When everyone is seated, usually the person at the head of the table will look at everyone and everyone's here, and then we'll say, bon appetit. And everyone at the table will say, merci, and then everyone picks up the fork and the knife, and then they start to eat. That would never happen in an Anglophone family. We don't wait necessarily, even in the UK, especially here in Hawaii. No one waits. You sit down, you start eating. You don't even know if everyone got their plate yet, and then you just dig it. No one says bon appetit or an equivalent expression in English. It doesn't exist. And even if someone said enjoy your meal, you would look at that person in a real live situation. You look at the person like, what's wrong with you? Because we don't do that. It's not our culture, but it is French culture. Mm-hmm. So, and the French cannot imagine other cultures where that doesn't happen. The same thing is true in English. When we say thank you, the normal response is you're welcome. I don't even know what you're welcome means. YOUR welcome, or YOU''RE welcome. And why are you welcome? I mean, there's no logic behind it, but it's what we do naturally. We say naturally. That doesn't translate. So you have to imagine native speakers of the target language sitting down for a meal, saying thank you, and then expressing in the target language the natural encounter back and forth. So, yeah, I mean, that's an example.
The system you described between like languages A, B, and C and B sometimes being problematic if that's the means through which C understands A.
Exactly.
That kind of raises for me the question of almost whether AI in today's world and the way it's been influencing literature and just the humanities in general, whether AI is almost acting like B as that problematic intermediary. And yeah, what are your thoughts on AI in translation and in your field?
AI works for major languages. AI in English is light years ahead of AI in Hawaiian. And so AI is not a monolith. It's too common for Anglophones like us to think of AI as being our technology, our invention. It is an English piece of technology. And then very often, because there are so many Anglophones in the world, we don't take into consideration other paradigms, other hegemonies, other languages. So AI in the major languages in the world are doing their thing and have the volume that it takes to reinforce and crowdsource. AI in Hawaiian is virtually non-existent. It's beginning. It's absolutely clunky if you do Google Translate. Translate English material, throw it to Google Translate, which is by now considered crude technology, and then create a Hawaiian, and then I, as a Hawaiian reader, read that converted text that you just threw into Google Translate. It'd be mostly gobbledygook. So it's mostly gibberish, which again is a Lewis Carroll reference. Um, it mostly gibberish. Um, and then there's the problem of Neo-Hawaiian versus traditional Hawaiian.
Yeah, that's a perfect opportunity to delve deeper into your theory of
I
Neo-Hawaiian.
just thought I
Yeah.
thought I'd tee up that ball for you. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's great. And yeah, I know that you sort of coined that term a few years ago, and I was wondering if things have changed over time and whether your perception of Neo-Hawaiian as something that's sort of different to how native Hawaiian speakers speak. Has that divide deepened over time, or has it changed in any other ways?
That's such a loaded question that needs unpacking
Yeah.
in many phases, actually, to be honest. Neo-Hawaiian. So that was what I thought I was coining. I was an attempt, a clumsy attempt, if you ask me, of me to describe a problem that existed in my head. It was like a
Mm.
splinter that I couldn't get out. And it was an attempt to describe what I had perceived as what was happening in the academic world, in the classroom setting, classroom learning, language learning environment, from textbooks, from teachers who themselves are not native speakers, but second language speakers, additional language speakers, versus my upbringing, which English is my first language. I came to learn Hawaiian as an additional language, but not from a textbook, not from school, nothing having to do with school at all, but rather from my own family, my grandmother, my neighbors, my hometown here where I'm at right now is the last place on earth where an actual community of native speakers exists, and have never lost the language at any time, all the way up until today, since the beginning of time, and they're here. So they have been my part of my environment in my formative years and in my language acquisition process. Coupled with me living with my grandmother, who also was a Hawaiian speaker. She was an English speaker too, but I'm the one that prodded her to just speak Hawaiian to me, and she did. And it didn't take long before I became a Hawaiian language speaker. It was years later when I stepped foot into a classroom setting at university here in Hawaii, and I was stunned. I was stunned at how different the language is, how they use. Many times, I was in my head as I'm watching and interacting and observing classroom users use Hawaiian language. I very, very often would say to myself, "Why are you saying that? Why are you saying those words? And why did your accent go like that at a question? That's English. That's not even Hawaiian." So yeah, it created conflict inside of me. And so that's the splinter I'm talking about. So my master's paper that I produced in 2002, so long ago, the title of it is Tutu's Hawaiian and the Emergence of a Neo-Hawaiian Language. Tutu is our common colloquial term for grandma or grandpa. And that was me reflecting on my own grandma, my tutu. And versus what I had been observing in the classroom setting and the disquiet, the conflict that I encountered. It was as if two paradigms were clashing against each other. And I also kind of felt that I was the only one saying it out loud in that academic circle. And so that was my attempt. So I thought I was so clever. I came up with this word Neo Hawaiian. Neo is NEO is used to mean new and is used in various contexts. So here I was thinking I was so clever about it. And then years later, I came to engage academic conferences around the world. Cambridge, Oxford, University of Edinburgh, in the United States, UCSB, other universities. I've been invited to speak by the University of the Philippines in Manila. My most recent invitation is in Okinawa at a university there to talk specifically about Neo-Hawaiian. What I came to learn is that the Neo construct is actually common and that people are actually using this term Neo. So there's Neo-Breton. The Breton language in the west of France is a Gaelic language. And similar to the Hawaiian situation, they're losing their speakers. The only ones left, the actual native speakers whose families never lost the language, are elderly, 80s, 70s, 60s. And the new generation of speakers are getting it entirely from a classroom setting, which is what I was just describing for the Hawaiian scenario. And so writers, academic writers, are terming that Neo-Breton, and that there is a conflict, and it's a societal and a political and hegemonic conflict between the two spheres. And that's exactly what we're going through as well. Well, the same is true in for the Manx language, Isle of Man in the UK. Some would frame the new movement to acquire the Gaelic language in Scotland in the same sort of way, that the new speakers coming out of the academic circles are butting heads with native speakers. There are all kinds of nuances involved. There are regional differences that are true, and then there are false differences that are entirely false, that are just made up. So we're encountering all of these things. Neo-Hawaiian representing, for the majority of people learning Hawaiian today are getting it from a classroom and are getting it from a teacher who themselves also got it from a classroom and a textbook with no native speakers around them to reinforce the paradigm, to reinforce the cognition. How does a native speaker think? And that's the point, the discursive point I love engaging. How does a native speaker think? I'm fortunate that I live in a town. My next door neighbors are native speakers, and we talk all the time, and we interact all the time. So sometimes I'll ask a new speaker coming out of the classroom, have you ever got into a fight with a native speaker? Have you ever had a sense of rage and anger and were about to, like, seriously, and you're just screaming your anger and they're screaming their anger back at you? Have you ever? No. 99% of the time, the answer is no. Then that means that you're missing an entire culture. You're missing an entire hegemony, and you're not in the brain of a native speaker. And if you're not that instant with your emotion, you're not that instant with your discourse as you engage it, the gap is vast between your level of competence and the competence of an actual native speaker. I'm not even there. And I've been a speaker of Hawaiian for decades, a few decades now. And I still consider myself at a disadvantage because it isn't my first language. And I wasn't raised amongst a family entirely of native speakers. I'm still on the bridge. I'm still crossing that bridge. I consider myself fortunate that I'm in this environment, but I still consider myself partial.
I'm sure this is another loaded question, but how can research and programs or even governments work towards perhaps bridging that gap between native speakers and then students who are quite new to the language? Is there something that can be done?
Yeah, and thanks for that question. That's actually happening in real time right now here in Hawaii, and it's very touchy, very sensitive, and I don't understand why, to be honest. But to wrap up that last thought I was just talking about, so I did describe a bit about that kind of fuzzy area of Neo-Hawaiian speak versus traditional Hawaiian speakers. And these are two spheres that have fuzzy edges around them. They're not solid and they're not very clear. I don't place myself in the neo-speaker arena or sphere, obviously, because that isn't my learning. My highest value is my own family. So my grandmother, and then my neighbors, my friends with whom I grew up here in this town. Not with the classroom. I don't feel much loyalty to the school. I don't feel loyalty at all to any textbook. So I'm somewhere in the middle. So if you have native speakers here, which I'm not, and neo speakers here, which I self-identify as not, then I'm somewhere in the middle. And so there is that. Our politicians that be in the government setting we have here in Hawaii right now, which is under U.S. occupation right now, which is the Hawaiian Kingdom is an independent state. It's an independent country with bilateral treaties with the United States. So the United States itself acknowledges the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state. But in 1893, decided to invade militarily with guns and held our head of state, Queen Liliuokalani, prisoner, and have been here ever since. And there is nothing legitimate that legitimizes the presence of the United States occupying the Hawaiian Kingdom until today. They will tacitly acknowledge that that is true, while at the same time saying, but that is irrelevant. And we're going to carry on with the U.S. administration. So the current government administration right now in Hawaii is a U.S. model with a legislature, and 100% of them are not Hawaiian speakers. Not one of them is actual Hawaiian speakers. So to say that they even understand the situation is not realistic. So we are having to explain until we turn blue in the face that there are native speakers and then there are language learners who are new speakers who don't even think like native speakers and have commandeered the entire language to their model of thinking in English, behaving in English, but uttering Hawaiian words. And even as they do so, native speakers over here stare at them, not even understanding what they're saying. And yet the government forces the government leaders that be defer to the classroom people, to the academics. I'm part of a group of a number of us of the native speakers here from here who have been appealing to government leaders here to address our needs separate from the needs of language learners. There are Hawaiian immersion schools, entirely 100% academic. And it is said often by, and I'm part of a research team as well, that is interviewing native speakers from here about their self-perceptions, their self-reflections on the language, how they perceive themselves and how they perceive those emerging out of academic circles and the Hawaiian language that they represent. 100% of the time they say, I don't know what they're saying, much of the time. I can't read the way they write with the diacritics, or I find it curious, or I find it, and some say, I can read it, but if you ask them if they prefer, how they prefer to use orthography, Hawaiian orthography, it's not that. It's the traditional model, which helps to describe these two spheres even more so. So it adds richness to the research and the baseline to establish a baseline. So our politicians are not aware, and they tend to defer automatically to the academics, and proposals that come from the native speaker circle to promote specifically their linguistic needs have been dismissed. Always deference to the faculties, the professors. And there have been protests on the side of the academics against the appeals coming from native speakers. How bizarre is that? So, but that gives you a sense. I mean, only about 300, maybe, actual native speakers left whose families have never lost a language versus a few thousand, perhaps 10,000 by now, 10,000 or more. Don't believe the census, because there has been census, and there's a question on it that says, what language do you use at home? I mean, we use a mix anyway of our language. So what kind of question is that? That's not a linguistically useful question. So if they tick that box, Oh, I use Hawaiian. Yeah. I mean, I speak English and I throw out a Hawaiian word and then they'll tick that box because so many people are looking forward to a day when they themselves can become a Hawaiian speaker. Many people desire the Hawaiian language but can't reach it, can't access it.
I wonder if there's other forms of a media or literature that can foreground the Hawaiian spoken by native speakers because I'm from Pakistan and a couple of years ago Coke Studio, which is a pretty big music studio based in a couple of different countries, but they have a particularly significant presence in Pakistan, and they had a shepherd from one of Pakistan's villages come in and sing in Turvali, which is one of the most endangered languages in Pakistan right now. And that caused an immediate resurgence of interest in the language because it reached over 7 million views on YouTube. And so many people got interested in this shepherd because it's a very ancient language. It's an Indo-Aryan language and it's been around for centuries. But again, it's endangered, and that singular song has revived so much more interest in it. So I'm wondering if there's other media forms out there that can foreground Hawaiian, a native Hawaiian.
Again, it's a nuanced question that
Course.
deserves a nuanced response. The short answer is yes, and then you have to qualify that with an asterisk to say, what do you mean by that? Because the assumption by default, based on my last response, is Neo-Hawaiian. So they'll run off in that direction and not the traditional native speaker direction. So the momentum is in the favor of Neo-Hawaiian, which involves a lot of making stuff up on your own, based on your English brain. And so that's the direction. There has been lots of invention of language, invention of words in the neosphere. I was on a committee that would invent words back in the 90s. I spent 6 years on that committee. And that work has continued amongst them till today. And the more invention like that happens, the bigger the divide. The divide spreads wider. The more of this indigenous invention happens amongst the new speakers. And it's only to accommodate or mask English. It's just masking English. And then here are the native speakers carrying on with a much more. Have they evolved over time? Absolutely. Have they innovated the language amongst themselves as native speakers until today? Absolutely. But the paradigms are entirely different. Hegemonies are entirely different, and the reasons for innovating are also different. Yeah, that invention that. So when you come to AI, here's my question for AI in Hawaiian. Create for me this, I don't know, short story. You task the LLM with the job of create a short story for me in traditional Hawaiian. What does that mean? So first of all, orthography, none of those marks are there. Those are modern inventions. It would be the truth. And again, the native speakers today, we don't use those marks. So one, the orthography would reflect the traditional paradigm. The language itself would reflect the native speaker paradigm. The way thoughts are expressed, the way scenes are described would be expressed through that lens. Now you tell that same LLM, now do the same for me, but in Neo-Hawaiian, and it would produce an entirely different piece with the marks, the orthographic marks that the classroom learners use, and also all of these invented language that were just invented within the past 10 years, 20 years, 30 years maybe, and then give that Neo-Hawaiian piece to a native speaker to read, and it will work.
You've mentioned inventions within Hawaiian, and that was actually something I was thinking of. And in terms of translation, have you ever had to coin your own sort of words in Hawaiian in order to successfully translate something? And how does that kind of reinvention or invention change? How is it different from other forms of linguistic invention, in your opinion?
Thanks for that question. Yes. So it sounds like I've been harping on this invention among the neosphere, and I hold to that. I hold to that. I have an internal policy that I created for myself that if I am going to create something, that if I do so, I'm going to hand it to a native speaker of my neighborhood, that they can look at it and figure it out, that they can look at it and make sense out of it rather easily, as opposed to the invention that's going on is completely foreign. So that's my internal policy. And I will consult. And fortunately, they're my neighbors here. And I have in the past, I have vampire. I consulted about vampire. I consulted about zombie, because these are features in the Harry Potter series, The Hobbit, Chronicles of Narnia. I've already translated all 7 Chronicles of Narnia. It's not published yet, and I'm in the back chapters of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the last book of the Harry Potter series. And so the first book of the Harry Potter that I did in Hawaiian is already out. It's been out since 2018. And we're small plug, shameless plug over here, desperately looking for funding to support the publication of all 7 Chronicles of Narnia and the entire Harry Potter series with my publisher, Evertype. And so these are terms that appear in the storyline. So I consulted and settled on terms, because vampires are not a Hawaiian thing, not in traditional Hawaiian anyway. Zombies, sort of, but not really. So I consulted there. So that's very important to me. If I create something, Jabberwocky in the second Alice book, Jabberwocky is intention. Even in English, Dodgson or Lewis Carroll intentionally created this nonsense language.
Yeah.
However, it's not so nonsense after all, because it is explained. Humpty Dumpty in chapter 8 of that same book explains the nonsense. And that's Lewis Carroll providing us a key to understand the Jabberwocky. In addition to that, there are other resource texts that you can rely on to help you understand the background behind Jabberwocky. So it may have seen, even the genre is called nonsense genre, but really there is sense. You can identify verbs and how they interplay in a clause. You can identify nouns. You can identify proper nouns and such. So yeah, all of these things have formulated my position now. You asked if I've come a long way and have changed my position. Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I am much more nuanced now. Back then, I was in kind of a still, it took a few years of shock and panic that I witnessed what I consider a clash of paradigms of speakers of Hawaiian, the classroom versus the native speaker. Now I see it for what it is, and now I am all about documentation. Just document the heck out of what's happening right now, and let that lie. Just let it stay in the record of our language and our people, and let it trouble learners. Because if we're not challenged to be, if we're not having both of these paradigms presented to learners, then to me that's a crime.
We've touched upon the disjunct between lived experiences of language and the academic sphere. And have you seen, as a translator, do you feel that disjunct between sort of academic theories of translation and what translation should or shouldn't be come into conflict with, or maybe resonate with, your own experiences of translation? Is there like that divide between your act of translation and what academics may perceive translation to be?
I thrive on the academic experience of research, and so uh, I feel you. I feel I'm in that same sort of space like you, and I love theory for theory's sake. I love philosophy for philosophy's sake. I love being able to identify and describe things. I'm not very good at attaching the label of the theory, that theory, that theory, that theory. I'm sloppy at the naming of them, but I get once you get into the description of them, yes, I know that. Yes, and I know that. So I have a good friend of mine at my university in New Zealand. Waikato University is where I got my PhD in New Zealand. And one of my colleagues there, a fellow PhD candidate, a woman called Jillian Deepin. So her thesis, her PhD thesis, was entirely devoted to the theory of translating sacred texts into her native language, Maori, New Zealand Maori. And at that time, when I arrived in New Zealand to do my PhD, the Quran had just been translated into Maori. And so the gentleman who did the translation work was a faculty member of our university. And it was, I mean, this is the Quran we're talking about. It's huge. The impact, the implications are so huge. And he himself is not Muslim. But he took on the work and he took it very seriously. And so her PhD thesis examines discursively, theoretically, philosophically, the approach to translating sacred texts. And I consumed her PhD. I find that so fascinating. And I consumed that thought, the seriousness of the thought that was invested into describing the work of translation and the implications it has, as I said earlier, serious implications for millions of people around the world, and it can be very personal. And if you settle on a particular paradigm in your translation, in your target language, people are going to anchor their belief system on your interpretation for years to come. And if someone comes and presents a competing translation, it causes tension, it causes conflict, internal conflict, and conflict between people because of this other presentation. So it's serious. So I appreciate the work that's involved. I take it seriously. I love to push back, and I love when pushback is presented to me as well.
I think we've also touched upon how language is, there's discontinuities within languages, and is intralingual translation something that you've worked on, or what are your thoughts on how intralingual translation could continue revitalizing a language like Hawaiian?
So you're talking about interpretation, essentially. Am I correct?
So translations within languages, because there's such a gap or such a distance between the language currently and what the language was like in the past. So whether
theoretically, you're talking about a traditional to Neo-Hawaiian translator, that role, perhaps.
If that would work, if Neo-Hawaiian was translated into native.
Right. Currently, people take offense. Many people take offense that you should even say such a thing, because they'd rather think that there's just one Hawaiian language. We're all one people, kumbaya. But really, when you nuance it out, the academic circles are really, and as time goes on, the divide is getting wider. The gap is getting wider between these two circles. So if what you're projecting forward is the emergence of translators who are needed to translate between that gap, is such a fascinating conundrum to present. And I love where your thought is going. I am a licensed courtroom interpreter. I have been, but I specify that I'm only interested in doing live interpretation for actual native speakers because they need it for comprehension. I'm not interested in doing it for neo speakers or new speakers uh, because they're actually English speakers. And in the courtroom setting, everything's in English and they understand 100% what's going on between all the characters in the courtroom setting. Whereas my neighbors here, and I have done courtroom interpreting for my actual neighbors here. I'm standing there as the interpreter watching all of the discourse and I'm translating live and they're only fixed on me. They're only staring at me because that's white noise. That's static. What's happening around them in English? I mean, it's not that they don't understand English at all, but not at that level, in that setting, in that context. And when they're asked to respond, they will stare at me and respond to me when they should be responding to the judge. And sometimes I even have to remind them, well, at least I try to tell, at least look at the judge. But they're talking to me as if I'm the one speaking. It's just a conversation between them and me in the courtroom. And then I have to turn and explain to everyone in the courtroom, particularly the judge. And I've also been called into the ICU at the hospital at the middle of the night to interpret for these native speakers who cannot talk to any staff or any doctor, especially in that context and in that moment when the stakes are so high and the tension is so high. I've been called in to do a psych evaluation in a social setting, specialist plus a person, and I was the interpreter. I've been called in to help with adoption services, again, for native speakers who really they could partially function in that context, but I was there to ensure comprehension, both directions. All those services are unnecessary for new speakers who are entirely English speakers. But there's a political drive. Yes, but I demand my rights for the Hawaiian language that was stripped away from us. I totally get our history. I know why the majority of Hawaiians are not Hawaiian speakers. I know. So I'm on board with that political drumbeat. I'm right up there marching alongside. But for functionality, for practical, pragmatic purposes in that moment, I will usually decline being asked to do live interpreting for a new speaker because it becomes a circus in the scenario, and I just prefer not to because I almost hate to say it because I have compassion and I have my empathy is there, my sympathy is there. I don't want to be used in that way when they perfectly understand English. But in this other scenario with the native speaker, I am passionate about the need for comprehension.
Thank you so much for that. And this conversation really could go on for hours. There's so much more to say. But I mean, this is going to be my final question. But what do you think needs to change within curriculums or the way that Hawaiian is being taught for this gap to seem less jarring? And as a translator, what sorts of projects are you hoping to take on in the future?
Well, the first part of your question is transparency. Transparency is my highest priority. If I were to change the curriculum, I'd begin with transparency. And first of all, they're in the classroom setting, and I know because for 17 years I taught at the University of Hawaii in Honolulu, and I am well aware that amongst my colleagues, there is no time to actually talk about why it is that we lost the Hawaiian language. And it's all based on grammar. And from day one, the sledgehammer of grammar is applied to the students. And yeah, there's an assumption that grammar is all it is. It's just a string of grammar and constant translation, which my PhD thesis delved into the history of the development of the field of language teaching and how in the early to mid 1800s you got this grammar translation approach where everything was just grammar, translate into English, which really only reinforces thinking in English. There may be some language usage involved, but ultimately it's anchored into this translation, grammar translation mode. Well, since then until now, here we are, 2026, perhaps almost 20 different theoretical approaches have emerged over time and developed over time. And now we're much more into discourse analysis and communicative language teaching approaches, which is so far away from grammar translation. And I conducted surveys of language teachers as well. Practically no one here is aware of the development of language teaching. So if I was saying earlier that learners need to know the mind and cognition of a native speaker, then that's what we should be focusing on, is that communicative competence. Uh, and that's how curriculum should be driven. It should be communicatively driven, not grammar focused, not translation focused. And so when you do delve into the communicative realm of language teaching as an approach, as an environment in the classroom, translation almost factors not at all, because it's everything is built on meaning, scaffolded upon meaning, and not grammar and not translation. Um, uh, Not entirely. I could go off into that separately, and I love to engage with others who are also invested in the field of language teaching and communicative competence and so forth. The UK is very advanced in that, very progressive. Here in Hawaii, Stone Age still. The other thing about projects, I'm involved in a serious research project to actually get into the cognition of our Ni'ihau speakers, who are the last community of true Hawaiian speakers as a community, entire families, family units. And that's where my passion is right now, is to help create a baseline. One thing we don't have really with our language, the Hawaiian language, is a baseline. A base. There's no. There are vague ideas of what to measure against. What usually happens in a classroom setting is people measure their language ability against each other, and they're both equal English speakers, students of the language, and they're competing or not competing. They're measuring their ability against each other, which they should be measuring against an actual native speaker. And so there's not even any attention to the native speaker. The attention is only internal to the classroom. So right now it's research. When I do my translation, again we could carry on, but let me just finish by saying, when I do my translation, I am loyal to the language that I grew up. I am loyal to the language that I've been introduced to. I do not translate into Neo-Hawaiian at all. That is not my attempt at all. I have conceded to use the marks, the orthography, realizing that the vast majority of people who would actually consume the materials that I translate are actually learners who will have to, as they're reading, we can read Harry Potter and with no dictionary there's no Oxford or Webster dictionary next to us, constantly searching. But that is the scenario with Hawaiian. So it's almost impossible for a new speaker to read my Harry Potter translation without also having to reach for the dictionary, which is a bilingual dictionary, Hawaiian to English, Hawaiian with English interpretations, which is a whole other subject in and of itself.
I was also just thinking that even dictionaries would be such a political topic to touch upon. Yeah.
But yeah, and it kills the enjoyment factor to have to constantly interrupt your reading by reaching for the dictionary constantly, kills the enjoyment factor. So it's almost impossible to enjoy Harry Potter in Hawaiian as much as an English speaker reading Harry Potter in English, where you can appreciate and enjoy all the intrigue and nuances and swings of mood and so forth. Final thought is the damage that had been done to our linguistic community here in Hawaii for the Hawaiian language has been so severe that how do you recover from that? It'll take generations, and I don't believe that where we land, and there's never a point that you land at. It's always in motion. It's a target in movement, in motion, but will not be a repeat of the traditional Hawaiian language. It'll be something else.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, and I can't wait to see where this research takes you. I'm sure it'll be really insightful and powerful for all of the revitalization efforts that you've been working on. And yeah, thank you so much for taking out the time today to be on the podcast. And I really enjoyed discussing all of these really important and often overlooked topics. And yeah, I was just wondering if you've got any parting messages or thoughts.
Well, I don't know if you're aware, some months ago there on Apple TV, there was the Chief of War mini series, the series that came out with Jason Momoa, which portrayed Hawaii 200 years ago. And I was a part of that project at the back end. We could talk about how the Hawaiian language was portrayed in that and in other projects. But happy to engage again for some future podcasts. That would be fantastic. But thank you so much for your invitation. I love the projection out to the world, and I love that there is interest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I hope you have a nice day ahead.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in this week. Join me in the next episode of Interwoven as we continue unwrapping